Today, we have a very special guest in Austin. We have Steph McCurdy from the Wolfram Blockchain Research Team joining us to discuss all things crypto, blockchain, thermoeconomics, EACC, AI. We're having just an open conversation and very lucky to have him here in person. It's a rare opportunity. Typically, we do most of this on a space or other times on YouTube or pre-recorded remote, but with him having the opportunity to drop by Austin, what better way to get in person and to have this conversation? So we have a list of topics, again, going to be something that is more loose and free flowing and just kind of picking Steph's brain and seeing where his current work is at, what he's doing, and the different topics that might touch on Quai some and all other things that are kind of trending in the industry. So Steph, thank you for joining. Would love to dive into your background, your journey, start with sort of what you started working on, what got you into crypto, what you're currently doing at Wolfram. So take it away and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thanks, Alan. I'm super excited to be here in Quai headquarters, Austin, Texas, to meet you in person. We've had a couple meetings, more than a couple meetings, across various things, UTXO Alliance, Quai, and our relationship with Wolfram.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking on the drive over here, I had 2 hours to kind of think about what is my my identity and my observer. Who am I in the space? Because I think a lot of the time it's helpful to kind of just situate the audience like, what kind of maximalist are you? That was the framing that I was playing with, because I'm a maximalist of many things. I'm a crypto maximalist. I'm a permaculture maximalist. I'm a Wolfram maximalist. I'm a energy money maximalist. And we use that maximalist term to, help people understand narratives about where people sit and, why somebody's shilling something, or just kind of trying to track what's going on in the crypto space via, Twitter. It's just super hard to keep track of. So who am I? My journey has been from an investing and speculation background turned into economics, which turned into complexity science, which turned into a Wolfram physics, and so forth. And so where I come today is a deep desire to just continuously learn, try and be humble about what I think I know, and also be very excited about some of the things that just are bubbling up for me.
Yep.
It's like this deep intuition and feeling that I know not to ignore over decades of seeing signals, investing in them, seeing things play out over 5 and 10 year time periods, finding out where I was wrong, where I was potentially right, not being Nassim Taleb fooled by randomness.
Or black swans.
Nassim Taleb is a big influence for me.
Nice.
And so I try to think about the world in terms of asymmetries, like asymmetric risk or asymmetric upside. And that means I have a large sensitivity to catastrophic risk as well. So big downsides, and at what scale are those downsides? So I think a lot about something called the meta crisis. And from an EAC perspective, they might bundle a bunch of meta crisis narratives as degrowth. And I'm just trying to find the balance in all of it between what is good growth, what are the things that humans value, are there better ways to measure our values, complexity science, to think about that question across different scales of physics, computation, biology, economics, culture, technology, the symbolic realm. And so all of that leads me to a deep interest, curiosity, and exploration of Quai Network and the energy dollar.
So let's give listeners a little more context. So you said economics was kind of your leaping off point, and I believe you got your degree in economics from Lafayette, and a soccer player there, and more involved on maybe the sports side versus the school side. So is economics what got you started in Bitcoin? Is that leaping off point, and maybe what time period was that, just to give everyone an idea of just how long you've been following this industry
Yeah.
and what really brought you into it.
Yeah. Economics was, but finance, investing, I wanted to know where economic growth came from.
Yep.
So like, where in the world does growth happen?
Yeah. Is macroeconomics even real? Right.
Is it real? Is it even macro? I tend to think that macroeconomics is actually microeconomics, and I would go a level higher and think about cosmology and cosmological evolution and how.
Well, macroeconomics is a very hard field to study because no one knows what's going on, and so it's the microcosms evolving into something that is macro that has things like black swans that are completely unpredictable because everything is so disconnected. But
yeah. And macroeconomics, like what is our common denominator that we hold constant for which we can measure what growth is across time, across scale. And so it raises skepticism about like GDP and inflation and, modern monetary economics. So economics is the right like field to put me in, but I've actually tried my best to ignore and not pay attention to traditional economic theories because I've found it actually distracting. At least until the point where I feel confident that I know some of these fundamental questions for myself, and then I can do a historical look back and try and work in what makes sense to me. Because in economics at Lafayette, there was no talk about energy in our economic systems and how that influences labor and capital. I mean, it's kind of just assumed or implied that we have a biosphere, that we have oil, that we have fuel sources, but it doesn't, if you take a step back and look at a bigger picture, energy is such a massive catalyst and force in this world to align with. And also as a boundary condition for what our biosphere can metabolize. And you deeply know what energy is to you at a human personal level. If we are complex systems, and you look at the economy as a complex system, what is the economy's metabolism?
GDP is an argument. So
it is a good argument.
Yeah, that's part of what people track. I mean, it's impossible to know what bubbles up to that number, but
and it's got truth in it.
Right.
I'm just of the perspective that we're in an evolutionary system and we're not static, and there's going to be a development in kind of every aspect of life in the universe, that things change. I want to know how things change, and I need to understand the underlying philosophies of how things change. So if I could at Lafayette study economics as philosophies of change, it would get me into physics and thermodynamics. It would get me into tech, like computation and computer science. It would get me into theories of the universe and deep philosophy and just kind of what are human values. And for me, that's all of that is economics, and economics is just such a blanket term that it's hard to piece out.
Well, it sounds like we need to define a thermoeconomics term and have that become studied and more well known. And I think that's part of what we're trying to define in everything we're doing with Quai and a lot of the synergies with Wolfram Research and others in the space that are trying to nibble on this idea of what it looks like to align an economy around energy, make it the cornerstone, and create monetary systems and structures around energy. And I think that's a lot of the debate happening right now is how much did that really influence a society? And really we see that high growth societies are abundant in energy, and there's sort of a correlation there that is a direct impact and downstream feature of just how nutrient rich, how sort of resource rich is this country, oil, hydro, wind, and all these other factors, and that kind of contributes. So jumping back in again to more into the tangible here, so zooming back in, you went from Lafayette, you were at Tesla for a little while, and you were working on energy there as well, so sparking a lot of that ideas and narratives. Tell us a little bit more about what you were doing at Tesla, and then maybe how you got over to Wolfram and that jump.
Right. So Lafayette, D1 scholarship athlete. soccer really influenced my life, and I'm just in a in a very core way. But so soccer was most of my life. Then I tore my ACL,
Brutal.
and
Yeah.
it was like a death, a
Yeah.
small death. It was a change in identity. Soccer was my identity, and but I
Yeah,
never.
the slick back hair, that's total soccer, like Zlatan, definitely giving those vibes.
I didn't have the long hair until COVID, where I was away from society for
Yeah.
a couple of months, and just like, all right, we'll give it a try. I could
Yep.
grow my hair out without a downside risk, which is also the same time that I met my fiance, and I'll actually bring her up because she's a fluvial geomorphologist,
Wow.
which is a fancy way of saying a hydrologist.
Yeah, that's
which
above
is
my head for sure.
a fancy way of saying she's a water scientist.
Got it.
And she works at the intersection of water, clean water, and affordable water.
Very cool.
And energy and water, they're very similar in the way that they work. And so I'm just trying to find as many analogies and many ways to think about our economic system that has these flows through them, flows of resources, and then how does the human influence these things?
Right.
And so stepping out of Lafayette with a lot of deep questions on my mind, I kind of just continued a traditional route, and I went and worked for a company called Cambridge Associates, which is a institutional investment advisor, and they advise large endowments, hedge fund of funds kind of strategies, and everybody was fighting over 0.1% return, or like, it was very much like if you outperformed your benchmark by some small percentage, you were doing a great job.
You're playing a whales game.
You're playing a whales game.
So impossible to compete.
That type of scale, it didn't really like get into deeper questions about where tech growth, culture, evolution come from. So I wasn't getting satisfied in asking questions there. Did the CFA, passed level 1, bumped into level 2, was like, am I going to generate any alpha from this standardized test from which everybody else is going to pass? And to be honest, like, academics wasn't my strong suit. And I say that having been a very B plus A minus student my whole life. My brother is the smartest person I know and was the cornerstone of what academic success looked like to me. So I always tried to find the niche where I could perform and excel. So,
hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, right? And so having smart people around you, I think, in life is one of those key things of just tapping on people when it makes sense, and then continually showing up and finding a way to use that to your advantage. And then in the long term, just having the repeated successes and getting lucky in the small ways that lead you to certain places that are more serendipitous, for sure. But
well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Unfortunately, he's also the hardest working person that I know. Unfortunately. But it's because I'm so close to him.
Yeah, that's like that meme of that one guy who was like an army guy, an astronaut, and then like some other role, and everyone's like, I would hate it if my mom was like friends with his mom. It'd be horrible. But I'll have to find that meme for the
Send it
video
out
later.
there.
Yeah.
Send it out there. I'm rambling a little bit, but there's I'm just at this time I'm 23, 24 with a quarter life crisis, I would say. Not sure exactly what I wanted to do, just kind of followed.
Yeah. I think that's standard for everyone nowadays, right? And it's getting worse, I think, with the financial nihilism and what everyone's struggling with, just the tech and the influence of everything and the society degrading some. It's not as straight of a path. So I think a lot of people would resonate similarly with that.
Yeah. I laughed because I would say that identity crisis is good. It's okay. And so it's not a bad thing. It's a realization that what's deeply meaningful to you isn't being manifested in the life around you.
Right.
And if you're capable and privileged and have worked hard to give yourself a little bit of space to step back and ask those questions, I think that's just such a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asking those questions, left Cambridge Associates, had enough money to kind of just play the markets a bit. And it was in that time around 2015 or it was 2014, started hearing podcasts by Wences about Bitcoin. And at this point, the Nassim Taleb asymmetric risk, asymmetric upside philosophy had just been deeply rooted in me. And I couldn't unsee the just speculative potential of what Bitcoin represented. And so in 2015, invested 1% of my net worth in Bitcoin. And that was enough to kind of carry me through a few years of trying to understand what it is and try to ask some of these big questions. And so I got deeply curious about physics and wanted to know more about how energy worked and why I was seeing more solar panels on people's roofs, or why I was seeing the proliferation of Tesla and electric vehicles and battery technology. And I'm the kind of person that, for me to do my research and to feel comfortable with a specific investment idea, I needed to go work for Tesla.
Yep.
And it was a good time to kind of like, I don't know, restash my arsenal of powder to deploy into what was becoming a broader crypto ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I needed a little bit of money, but I was definitely going there to ask a question about how does the electrical grid work? Is solar power a viable option?
Realized solar blows my mind because it's one of those things where you always want to wait because it's always going to get better. So when does it make sense to actually put a solar panel on your roof or use it at scale and upgrade these systems? Because they're not easy to replace.
No.
And they're actually pretty feeble in terms of the actual hardware and the devices. And so if you wait 4 years, you're going to get that sort of benefit of delaying. So I don't know in terms of solar if we're there yet. I'm sure we are now in 2025 compared to 2018, 2019. So that leap just always cracks me up some.
Yeah, it's true. That economics is you have this opportunity cost. Should I put out how many thousands of dollars now to get the system?
Right.
Or should I lease it and let the company that puts it on my roof own the production of them? And there's a lot of like solar credits, but your electricity bill is lower for the foreseeable future, but it makes it harder to sell the house because you don't own the system. So you're giving it to the net. There's a whole thing. I justify solar panels immediately for one main reason, which was centralized grid failure.
Yeah.
Leading to an inability to live a high quality life, let's just say, so dependent on, especially Americans, so dependent on electricity and the fuels that we convert into electricity. So for me, it was always kind of like this, let me cover my downside risk. If the grid goes out, am I still capable of producing my own electricity?
Yeah.
Well, I found out while working at Tesla that when the grid goes down and you have solar panels, but you don't have battery backup, your panels go out as well.
They're useless.
They're not any more useful. So it's simply a cost reduction question over a extended time period. I got to a calculation where it seemed about 8 years was the full payback period if you bought the panels. It was worth the investment, and they have a lifetime of 20 to 30 years.
So that's not bad. So you can sort of amortize it. But if you wait the 4 years, then it might be 4 years.
Exactly.
And then sort of decreases. So jump from Tesla now, you're at Wolfram Research on the blockchain side, and Wolfram does all sorts of different sort of inner workings with blockchain systems. You work with Bitcoin, Cardano, Ethereum. You guys provide Oracle services. You have tons of access into the Wolfram language, allowing people to plug in directly to access these blockchain systems. Maybe you could give us a synopsis and an idea of, sort of how Wolfram is sort of gotten into this blockchain area, what that key focus is, those questions you're trying to ask. Because when most people see Wolfram, they say, okay, I've used Wolfram Alpha, I've plugged in, I've used the calculator resources, I've used a lot more of the physics-based approaches for studying and looking at what I typically do around college or university and homework and other pieces there. So, but to sort of now be in this position where Wolfram has this whole other arm and this whole other exploratory group of people working in blockchain and other industries as well, maybe give us that high level of how that formed and the goals that your team is trying to achieve.
Yep, sure. So let me just sneak in last point about Tesla.
Sure.
It was for us to make those solar panels more worthwhile would be to combine it with a battery storage system. Yep. And battery storage is on a kind of an exponential decline in cost.
Wow.
Because of the scaling up of battery production by companies like Tesla. So I walked away from Tesla, which was very chaotic at the time. It was 2018.
Yeah.
And it was the ramping of the Model 3. I stepped away from Tesla, having learned this deep thing, which oriented my next set of questions about, okay, in a world where solar does work because battery production does scale, because we're doing the Tesla master thesis of, expensive sports car all the way down to the consumer cheap car, and then adding in autonomy. I had a point of view of the world that said something about we can do clean energy, we can manage the grid, but the grid is more of the limitation than it is accessing the energy. This is kind of my fundamental thing. Okay, so let me just jump ahead. Stepped out of Tesla. This is around 2019. Yeah, so I understood the thing that I was looking for at Tesla, what I wanted to learn about the electrical grid and some of the major constraints and limitations. And I was in between jobs, in between Tesla and Wolfram. And I only found out about Wolfram in April of 2020 when Stephen Wolfram launched the Wolfram Physics Project.
Right.
Fell completely headfirst down a Wolfram rabbit hole for the next, it's been 4 years from that moment. Everything I did was to try to understand, what is Stephen Wolfram saying? What is his book called A New Kind of Science actually about? How does that inform a new way of approaching physics? How does that relate to economics and some of these fundamental questions about energy that I had? And so I learned as much as I could. I got invited to join their summer school, which is kind of this camp where we work directly with Stephen Wolfram on a specific project. The specific project that I submitted to him was, what is the deep connection between energy, computation, and value? And I want to study Bitcoin.
I didn't even know that. Yeah. Very, very cool.
And this is where Stephen pointed me down to look at cellular automata and Conway's Game of Life. And for those who don't know, Conway's Game of Life is this open-ended black and white grid system for which you can give a few simple rules, like if the adjacent neighbor is alive, then this one becomes alive and it's represented by a black square.
Right. And
a lot of scientists and researchers study Conway's Game of Life because these simple rules can produce really complex patterns, sustainable patterns that live and grow and kind of like shoot out across
and it's ever changing and randomized. Yeah.
So you have randomness in there. You can start from initial conditions. You can find really deep patterns, and then it's been proven that that is Turing complete. And so you can do any type of universal computation in this 2D space.
Yep.
I wasn't quite satisfied by that pursuit because I couldn't find where energy, which was this fundamental thing to me and to life and to economics, existed in that space. So it was helpful to understand how Stephen thinks of computation as this fundamental way to model all things in the universe.
Yep.
So it just kind of encouraged me to keep learning more. What have I learned? I've learned that at the fundamental level, what Stephen Wolfram is doing is looking at all transformation rules of symbolic expressions. And in order to find the space of all transformation rules on different symbolic expressions, one needs to develop a language.
Yep.
This is the Wolfram language. It's a computational language, which means it's supposed to be spoken by humans and interact with machines, but at a level much more abstract, much more symbolic, much higher level than kind of the bare metal, speak to the computer and get the extreme performance out of it.
Yep.
And it was done this way, in my opinion. I don't speak for all of Wolfram Research or Stephen. And I had never used Wolfram language before. I'd never used Mathematica or Wolfram Alpha. These things just didn't pop up for me. So I'm a newcomer to this. But what I've learned is that if you want to speak the language of mathematics and physics and computation, and you want to explore the space of all possible rules, not just rules that are only meaningful to humans, but rules that may be meaningful to artificial intelligence or artificial life, or
the fundamental understanding of how our world is created and structured. Because I think Stephen stands as a bit of an outlier in the physics group and in academia and in this construction of this modeling and in this approach. He's created his own sandbox for creating how he views the evolution of physics. And I think he covers much of that in his book and how he gets to these sort of causal invariants, hypergraphs, and structures that are this completely redefined model. And I think from what I've seen, he's more correct in that thinking. And so there will be this sort of tide shift and awakening of people that are saying, well, this is actually the right way to actually rethink physics from a ground up approach, and how that informs other systems like biology, chemistry, and get us these breakthroughs that we really sort of run into with ceilings in different industries, because physics is the main thing that's driving the underlying process of everything here. So to create that sandbox and to create it in a way that's used to give people tooling, I think is extremely powerful. And I've played with the Wolfram language some and have created different types of structures, and it always is super impressive on what people are able to create and sort of elaborate on to validate something and explore kind of what we're doing with what you're probably about to jump into with thermoeconomics and all the different concepts that sort of get us to this point.
Yeah. I'm not the one to say this physics approach is right or wrong. I am deeply curious about it, and he makes some different assumptions at the base layer, which give us potentially better ways of explaining things like general relativity, quantum mechanics, statistical mechanics.
Well, he's continually reproved those theories in that structure and in that construct. So that's always impressive from my point of view, is if you can recreate the expectation in a different way of thinking, it lends some credence to the thought.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Wolfram is about going down to physics, mathematics. He wrote a book, Metamathematics. He wrote a book about the second law of thermodynamics. He's talking about computation with a capital C.
Yep.
So in your epistemology, when you adopt this point of view, it fundamentally changes your ontology, like how you see the world. And it puts computation kind of before physics, in my perspective.
Right.
So then if you're thinking about complex systems, biology, economics, humans, and you start from the ground up and you emerge upwards and you're trying to get to economics and say something about the world, how should we design our monetary systems? How should you talk about your governance systems? What do humans value? Where does economic growth come from? It is enough of a paradigm shift to reveal new truths about the world.
Right.
A lot of Stephen's work has been about just laying the groundwork for fundamental, basic science of
Mm-hmm.
computation.
I mean, when you talk about that stack, it feels like economics is kind of way up here in the social layer,
Yeah.
and like all of the humans are doing some very high level processing that actually doesn't pull anything through from the fundamental source of physics. And it feels like what we're trying to do with thermoeconomics is sort of pull that
Yeah.
metric up and make it useful in economics. So maybe sort of concretely,
Yep.
I'd like to ask you, what is thermoeconomics, or how do you define it? How do you view it? I know it's very loose in terms of this evolving sort of group of people that's trying to make it useful. But from your perspective and viewpoint, how would you classify it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's try and do the whatever that is.
Yeah.
Thermoeconomics has been a field that has existed for quite some time in economics.
Mm-hmm.
What I've always felt from reading those books, literature, papers, was that it was trying to take too much of mashing physics and just economics together and
Mhm.
saying, this is thermoeconomics. These things are true in physics. These things we know to be true in economics. If we just put them together and we use the right language,
Right.
that's thermoeconomics. And they do talk about energy.
Yeah. I mean, applying a sort of physical approach to an economic system with valves and flows and
Yes.
having the different way of capital being moved between groups and the productive capital of humans, as well as the sort of underlying capital of the actual resources versus actually quantifying those resources, I think is sort of the key trade-offs.
That's a main point to this.
Mhm.
And let me just say something again about this observer, me. I said before that I tried to be ignorant of most economic theories so
Mhm.
that I had kind of a clearer view myself. I did the same thing with thermoeconomics as I saw it. It was confusing to me because I didn't understand a few key things about thermodynamics, about computation, and
Mhm.
what Stephen talks about. So when I approach those resources, they could very well be right. Like
Mhm.
there's a book called Thermoeconomics. Just at the time, a few years ago when I approached it, just wasn't making any sense to me. So I put that stuff to the side. Why I'm reinvigorated by the idea of thermoeconomics and why I think it's the right term now is because if we can make our way from a deeply symbolic set of transformation rules down here at Wolfram physics level,
Mhm.
and we make our way up through various information processing systems that biology does, and we make our way up to a resource allocation system where markets are the main mechanism for allocating resources in a distributed, decentralized way,
Mhm.
and we get up to something like prices and financial value, and all these things are swirling around in this symbolic economic space. And you have a particular background and I have a different background because we're from different geographies or
Yep.
different cultures. And I value this about life and you value this about life. Then we need something that kind of harmonizes
Yeah.
all of that. So we have that. We have money.
Mhm.
We have working money. We have
Maybe.
Okay, that's a punchline here. We have something that at least the broad population
Right.
of 8 billion people have a spectrum of access to working money. Like how I see everything, we're in a changing, adaptive, complex system. And so one money that has been in existence for a long period of time that is controlled by certain actors. Just my fundamental belief is that cannot, that potentially won't have all of meet the needs
Yeah.
of a changing landscape like we are currently in.
Well, it doesn't have the signals, and the signals are lagging. So if you look at the Fed and how the Fed works, they do their tracking on inflation prices, and then they actually go into a store and they sort of just pick things out and they say, well, this head of lettuce was $1, now it's $1.10. Here's inflation. And then so
Yes.
that's a very lagging signal, because if you look at the source, well, that head of lettuce had to have changed prices due to a accumulation of modifications in the supply chain, and that supply chain ultimately is net affected by energy and energy prices from a physical standpoint. So if you look at it from the source, and if you look again in your terms of value and perception of, say, the spindrift in this can, well, this has a certain amount of kilowatts and consumption of energy, and the tin and the aluminum all had to come from a place and get consumed in a way. The water, talking about water earlier, had to be filtered and had to be actually, consumed in a way that's usable for drinking, and that has a cost of energy allocated. So all of these things around us have a real sort of unit cost and a unit basis for the energy consumption and allocation. But then we add extra perspective onto that, which I think currently we exist in a world that the fiat currencies and the currencies that were traditionally more thermoeconomic, potentially, I think there's an argument there. If you say, well, our dollar standard was on gold, and gold was this sort of physical good that had an energy consumption, and it had a process that required people to go in, mine it, and we all kind of knew, because the world wasn't going to get hit by an asteroid that had tons of gold on it, mega tons of gold on it, although that does exist now, and that is a concern. If you look at the gold market, they're like, Elon's going to go mine asteroids for gold. So like, how realistic that is, I don't know. But that's still a concern if you look at gold, and then that transpires to Bitcoin too now, again, sort of jumping back on the crypto side, and people are saying, well, Bitcoin's a better gold. It's thermoeconomic in a sense because it has energy consumption. It has people that are doing computational work, but it also has this fixed cap that gold doesn't have. And so we can say, well, it has this hardness property that we can ensure no asteroid is going to hit Bitcoin, and there's going to be 50 million Bitcoin instead of 21. So I think all of those sort of construe this thought of what is money, how you perceive it, and its practical use cases. I think Bitcoin and gold are closer to this idea of having this unit bias that's tangibly tied to energy. Fiat has potentially lost some of it, as I said, with that lagging signal, because now we're trying to hit this moving target, and it's more of a social layer and acceptance of, well, we have to prop up the system of banks and all of their balance sheets and ensure that we can sort of socialize losses when they occur, and make sure that there isn't runs on the bank to ensure that we're whole. And then we rely on the actual capital of the US, and then the sort of just the power that the US has, which is beneficial if you live in the US, but it's also sort of an extortion if you don't. And I think that all sort of brings in different ideas. And I'm rambling now as well, just in terms of what this idea of thermoeconomics can tie to. But again, bringing up that point on Bitcoin, would be interested to hear, as we loop in more around and circle around on this idea of thermoeconomics, how you view Bitcoin in this light. And again, since you've been in the Bitcoin space, you've seen it evolve, you've seen what it's gotten to. Is Bitcoin thermoeconomic? Does it have thermoeconomic properties? And I guess what other catalysts in that space would you view as useful for Bitcoin?
So much of what you just said was, you just kind of encompassed.
Yeah.
Here are all major questions in a field of study that we could call thermoeconomics.
Well, that's where I see everything kind of skating to. And I think we're getting to the point where Bitcoin's useful, and we're seeing it. I mean, it's a $1 trillion asset and will continue to grow, but those questions will go unanswered for some time. So hopefully we can narrow that in.
I do see Bitcoin on the spectrum of thermoeconomic as a, I kind of see anything that's doing proof of work as a consensus mechanism fall into the category of thermoeconomics, something at least worth studying in, I want to put this big spectrum and just find where do things exist along this spectrum of extreme thermoeconomic or very loose thermoeconomic.
Well, I've seen people talk about Bitcoin like a battery, and I have to mock them some, because I do share your thoughts that Bitcoin is thermoeconomic, but you can't turn Bitcoin back into energy, and that's just physically not possible.
This was a perspective that I had for a while. I was like, oh, yeah, there's some connection here between energy and this money, and this money being energy. It's physically energy. And I went through a whole progression of trying to understand what that even means.
Right.
I think it's a fair process to work through. And I've just continuously done this work to get closer and closer to a deep understanding of what does it mean to be work-based? What is the relationship symbolically between a physical energy transformation into a valid proof
Yep.
that then enables us to transfer value units.
Mhm.
And what is the actual value? It's a deeply human determined individual basis by a market mechanism to give us kind of, this is the aggregate understanding of it. So like I've been asking all those questions myself. Bitcoin is thermoeconomic to me, but in the evolution of thermoeconomic systems, I have the belief that there are better ones.
Yep.
Ones that that are more precise to the thing that actually gives us an index to that thing on which all of life has a universal demand curve for, which is energy, which is actually not the right word to use, because energy is this kind of amalgam. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It's a aggregate term.
Entropic reduction. That's the term we commonly use in terms of seeking. So I mean, not sure if that's the point you're alluding to, but
the point that I'm just trying to get to is that I'm finding out that energy, if you want to be precise about what you're talking about, energy is a good general term for humans to talk about the thing that we consume, that we know goes into our car, that we know intuitively some is affecting our farming and how airplanes fly and what's powering the electricity here. But it's just kind of, we have there's this term hedonic adaptation, which is we humans have just been so normalized to the wonders around us that we've kind of lost the ability to see how incredibly complex everything is. And that doesn't...
And people are peopling, right?
And
it's everywhere. So I kind of have that same realization too sometimes, like, man, we build a lot of stuff and America is full of consumers and we have all of these systems around us and it's difficult to maintain. I think when you look at the grid too, it's one of those things where it's one of the most fragile systems and has so much upkeep. And so then you have to look into things like microgrids and batteries and other ways to reinforce that, to get isolation and reinforcement. And all of that goes back into this statement that's just, it's impressive that all of it has been built whenever it's just the system of people all ensuring that it happens and gain seeking to that one goal. And then all of that, of course, driven by money and physics and other things that align for that. So jumping off too, I think because we're getting into that conversation of EAC, and I think a lot of people, we're high in the clouds here, and so if you're following along, definitely, if you're in that EAC movement or EACC and you're seeing these trends emerge, there's people that are looking at this and they're saying, well, the money systems are perturbed and they're lagging behind how they should be utilized, and there's more efficient ways, there's more optimal ways to structure something around energy and around this physics-based approach. So I'd be interested to hear just again, high level, just like what would that society look like and what would be those gain-seeking methodologies for society to function around money? Does that help us get us to Mars? Does that help us create more AI that's useful? Does that help us get GPUs to everybody so that they can run their own processes? Is that something that we should strive for as a society? Again, high level questions around this concept of energy money. What would be some of your initial thoughts there?
I want to add one thing about when we look at the world around us and we see kind of like civilization and we say, wow, extraordinary, like complex. It's got its goods and its bads. I just also want to say that from a Wolfram perspective, the deep intricacy and complexity and beauty of just pure nature is, from his physics perspective, is these things are doing equivalent computations.
Yeah.
There is deep, I was going to say intelligence, but from his perspective, when he talks about complexity, there are things in nature that are computationally irreducible, which kind of means that they are equivalent in their sophistication to things that we see in civilization.
Yep.
And so we can't put necessarily, in the computation sense of the word, a hierarchy of this one's more sophisticated than this one.
Right.
We kind of can see that there is deep, I'll say intelligence. There's deep
complexity, right? If you look
yeah,
at tree organisms that are as big of a city, and then you look at
and the network of
certain
trees
exactly,
and the ecosystems that live within the trees and
Mhm.
underneath of the trees, and the mycelia and the birds, and then how birds migrate
Yep.
and how it, drop seeds in a field, and that whole system. We could choose to look at it holistically and see us as one system. And anyway, I'm deviating, but the point is, I just want to acknowledge that there's, in my point of view, deep complexity everywhere.
Mhm.
And from a Stephen Wolfram point of view, he's proved that deep complexity comes from the simplest rules that we can define in a system.
Right.
And that's basically related to universal computation and Turing completeness.
There should be no jumps. It should be, we can get there with this framework, and we can define these rules. It could be modeled, and we can explore. And I think that does actually kind of lend credence to the AI argument, and the fact that we can create these constructions of LLMs and then make them more usable and have them get some level of, not necessarily general intelligence, but a semblance of intelligence. And then again, as you get to sort of not only just the understanding of how AI will impact the systems, but then get intertwined with money as well. So I think that's a huge area that I'm personally excited about, is what is that concept of money to AI? What is that concept of understanding of our systems to these systems that are more, defined by code and defined by logic and models that we don't really fully understand.
Yeah. So I know I just said something about there not being a hierarchy there, but I believe that there's definite hierarchical ways of viewing the world that are very important and useful. And it ties in with how I understand emergence and how higher order things can emerge from sets of systems. And so, if we kind of look through the lens of complexity science, which is essentially trying to see how things are true at different scales. And so we call this scale invariance. What are true things down in physics, biology, that are scale invariant, that are true and isomorphic up into the economic space? And when we're in the economic space, or I say economics, I'm talking about culture broadly, I'm talking about technology broadly, I'm talking about synthetic life and artificial life and artificial intelligence. We know that lifelike systems require energy.
Yep.
As we develop technology that allows us to embody, manifest more lifelike systems, they're still going to need energy to facilitate the computations that run those systems. And some of those systems are going to do things that make no sense to us.
Yep.
Because they're going to be exploring a different computational space than what we as bounded beings, they're also bounded, but they have the kind of
less bias. They have certain biases, but
and they have access to a certain level of scale of computation that can make use of human language in general and explore things at a different space. What's my point? The point is, energy is deeply fundamental. We know that to be true across all lifelike systems.
Yep.
And so what's running the computation that gives rise to artificial intelligence? And this is where I think sci-fi comes in, and where I think about movies like Ex Machina, which is a huge influence on me. That if that system has a need for an energy source and needs to perform computations and allocate resources, blockchains do establish this platform for where one can incentivize the building of nodes or data centers or other systems that take in energy and give them the life that that they're exploring. I don't know.
Yeah, I think when you look
That's
at
where
the
I'm.
AI replication there, the field is emerging, but we haven't gotten to the point where we've seen decentralized AI and people are sort of LARPing
Sovereign
this crypto.
AI.
Yeah, sovereign AI, this sort of LARP in terms of we're gonna have AI crypto, but it's just gonna be a human pressing buttons and AI spitting out garbage on Twitter and random slop. And I think you can always identify the real writers of people that are constructing human language versus AI, which is always pretty funny. And the real sort of test around this industry hasn't been created around how do we actually democratize AI? How do we get more people involved with it? Because I think it's a very useful tool. And if you look at it practically, I think this should be something that everyone should be using from a basic standpoint of access. And I think there's bias in these models if you use Claude or you use Gemini or you use ChatGPT, and we should find ways to remove some of that or at least give options. But I think humans should be well equipped with these tools, and I think that's going to be a large separator between people that can actually rely on this and have it benefit them and be okay with it giving them an answer more immediately because it's a tool of prosperity. We've gotten to the point where we can create these systems. I should be able to interweave that into my skill set versus being like, no, I need to do it this way. And I think that's always the sort of, fight against the machine and fight against the ever force of more and more technology. But I think that's just such a big order of magnitude benefit that we're going to have to find ways to continually democratize. And I think that can be done with blockchain, and that can be done in a way that gives these systems that self-replicating tool and ability. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. If you look at what Eric Voorhees is doing with Venice AI and other people like Eternal AI that are publishing models on chain, and more of these ways to just get this open model to everybody, and also the size of the model and the weights and how that's transpired. But I think from our standpoint of how we view sort of EAC and again the process of energy and energy influencing these systems is they're craving that. So they need access to GPUs, they need access to kilowatts. I think energy is the main bottleneck right now for growth of AI. And so you have large players like NVIDIA, like Amazon, like Microsoft acquiring data centers, acquiring more and more GPUs, and the spice that they have to create literally to run these models. So I think that's all a thermoeconomic game that we're playing. We're playing this not necessarily competition of money because all these people have all of the money in the world. If you look at Apple, if you look at the FANG companies, they have all the money. Money doesn't matter to them. It's a matter of how do we apply human labor in a way to source thermoeconomic processes, to apply this in a way that can grow this basically cash cow of AI right now as people demand and scale up. And then I think we'll hit a point of a sort of an apex and a transition phase where we say, we've used all this compute, we have all this usefulness, LLMs are topping out, we're really seeing diminishing returns on the performance and the benefit. So now we have all this compute, we have all these GPUs, we have all these things that we're not necessarily using them for. And then again, I think that thermoeconomic build out is still useful from having that compute, and it could be turned towards other things and benefits and applications of actually using the AI versus having it developed. And so I think we're in that sort of mid-stage thermoeconomic game, and we're hopefully, from what I've seen and the trends that I'm seeing, get into that point where an energy dollar makes more sense in this context. And it makes more sense for how we align AI, how we align people to actually go in and train these systems, use these systems, and have sovereign systems that have a gain sinking function that they can tangibly understand, because they can't understand what a dollar is, but they can understand what a kilowatt is. And so if we can create these things in these processes, because that is, again, that natural jump. Because when you talked about these systems of how we build physics to economics or into chemistry, biology, we should be able to model these things that say, I have a tangible timeline to have it usable in this way. And I think a thermoeconomic process to an AI agent or to something that's running in AI has a clear sort of boundary condition and a clear way of comprehending what energy is.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And I want to go backwards just a little bit to talk about the value of a energy money to us.
Yeah, totally.
Before AI.
Yep.
And then make the EAC jump. And for I don't know if people know, probably your audience does, effective acceleration, EAC. I think Guillaume is putting out a very good presentation about the foundations of a thermodynamic computing thesis.
Yeah.
And it kind of explains why energy is such a fundamental question and where the second law of thermodynamics comes in. But if I could just jump back to the understanding why energy money is important to us humans in our current economic systems is because we are energy blind. This is something that Nate Hagans talks about on his podcast called The Great Simplification, which I've completely enjoyed. And I think he's hitting on something in the field of ecological economics. And my main goal is to see systems that give us greater potential to measure how we use our resources. Because if we are bound to a system that has to balance the production of debt with growth, it's kind of blind growth, in my opinion. If there's, it's kind of just like growth.
Yeah.
And that's growth everywhere, anywhere. All growth is good. No growth is bad.
Yep.
We're going to grow. We're going to grow through all of our constraints. All of our constraints are fake constraints because there's abundant energy, there's abundant water. But really there are greater constraints that we need to take into account. So I'm looking for a system that helps us understand, how do we identify what our biosphere's metabolism threshold is?
Yep. I
don't have any problems with trying to change how that metabolism works, but it needs to be, you need to be very careful.
Yep.
Because the downside risk to us doing some small change to our complex system biosphere can throw off radical downstream consequences that nobody can take into account.
Yep.
And that can really, there's this phrase, subsume the substrate. It can undermine the systems for which we depend, and we cascade downwards instead of doing the, what EAC would want to do in the opposite direction. Yeah. And I think I personally see very solid arguments in both directions. And I want a system that allows us to speak about this universal demand on energy across all life systems, so that we can at least have a common denominator when we speak about how are we allocating resources.
Yep. That's
energy money to me. And to me, what Quai and Qi are in the balance of a system for a monetary system solves essentially all of the same problems and more that I found to be useful from Bitcoin.
Right.
And then when you study Bitcoin long enough, you do, like, it's not all positive. You do want to just kind of see, are there limitations? And then what I'm seeing is what we're doing in crypto is exploring the whole space of possible symbolic transformations of different economic systems. So that's the state channels, that's the roll-ups, that's proof of stake, that's proof of work, that's proof of entropy minima, that's sharding, that's all of these things. And I would never try to be the person that says, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But I know that the exploration of this space is going to it's going to produce evolutionary dynamics that give us better and better measurement systems, which money is in its form of a unit of account, in the form of a medium of exchange, in the form of a store of value, in the form of a pure optionality token, in the
Yep.
form of a pure liquidity token. There's all of these things about money that, and it's also there's this real simplicity about adopting money.
Yeah.
Is that it's kind of like using the internet protocols for your favorite app. It's like, you don't know how any of that stuff works.
Right.
The back end of these monetary systems, most people aren't going to understand how they work.
Yeah, to kind of get crypto pilled, you have to recognize all things in the traditional finance ecosystem. And I think that's like the rabbit hole people fall down, and the way that they sort of end up in different places in terms of, again, circling back to the prior point that we led off with, is in terms of maximalization and what you identify with and what you align with, and what you have to really go down that system of. Because some people, they get into crypto, they're like, XRP is great because it's going to replace remittances and it's going to be used alongside banks, and I'm okay with banks, I'm friendly to them, I don't fully go down that sort of sub layer of how the banks all function. So XRP is good, and I think the markets are actually playing that out right now, where XRP is about to potentially take over ETH in terms of market cap over the next 6 months if things go well for them. And that's like what they're hoping for, because they're fine with that alignment, versus the original Bitcoin crowd, the more cypherpunk based, that says, well, we're actually creating Bitcoin to sort of subserve banks, and to have it be an alternative to that gets us an opt out of that system. And then when you look at how the different trends and the different systems that are playing out for structuring an economic model and structuring a way in which money can be created and then operated, because I think that operation is where I spend most of my time debating people on Twitter for no reason, and having the operation of that be aligned with the economics, because they have to go hand in hand if you're looking at how to maintain that and have a constructive way of cooperation in the long term, when you can bring back in things like debates with proof of work, proof of stake, ways in which people can cooperate to maintain a ledger. Why should they cooperate? What's that reasoning for that? If you look at Bitcoin, that introduces the debates on long-term economic security with respect to halvings. What does that mean, again, for the more and more time that Bitcoin goes on? And if the price of Bitcoin isn't going up, will people just altruistically mine Bitcoin because they have it? Things like that. And then bringing back in again with proof of stake and how that compares from a thermoeconomic model to more of a social capital model. And I think all of those things, again, playing out in real time with markets. And that's going back to your point on why we're excited about the Quai and Chi side, is, well, if we could bring in those thoughts of, well, maybe we're not there yet with our current systems of how Bitcoin was designed, or Ethereum in being a proof of stake model, or other blockchains in terms of how they manage their economic primitives, or manage their validator sets, or manage their decentralization from day one. That really is what inspires us. And then bringing people along like yourself for their journey to talk about it and explore and tie in different things. I'm sure, there's tons of different ways that we've brought in thought to explore that, to refine what we're doing, and then refine, because ultimately the market is the winner, and the market is where things get tested, and where the people that can talk about these ideas can go and reinforce it with actual tech that's on the ground, and actual economic policies that are utilized and confirmed or validated or invalidated. So, from our side, definitely excited to continue to explore that. Coming up on time here, I think we're about a little over an hour in. Would like to wrap up, and I know we've covered a lot of ground here. I think we've pretty much hit everything on the agenda, but would love to sort of get a wrap up on current work, maybe a little bit more on UTXO Alliance, plans on that. We're a proud partner of the UTXO Alliance, and working with other blockchains to explore how to actually get people using crypto, bringing everyone on chain, promoting these ideas of decentralization, censorship resistance, alternative ways of exploring economic design. So love to hear about current plans for that, and ways people can get involved there.
Again, you said a lot that I agree with, and so I'm gonna have to show some great restraint, not taking any one of those things, and I'll wrap it up into parts of things that I'm currently working on. Again, acknowledging my own who I am in this space. You mentioned XRP, and Wolfram Blockchain Labs has participated in their grants ecosystem, and Wolfram Blockchain Labs participates in the Cardano grants ecosystem, and I pay people in ADA. I'm a Solana holder and a Bitcoin holder, and I'm a Bitcoin cold wallet holder, and I'm a Fidelity Bitcoin holder.
Michael Saylor got in some hot water for his recent opinions on that, just in terms of telling everyone it's okay to have it on exchanges. So good to hear that you're at least on both sides.
I'm a like I said, crypty maximalist.
Yep.
I'm a crypto maximalist. Um, Again, I'm an alliance member of the UTXO Alliance, which Quai is a member. Nervos, Cardano, Ergo, Alethium, Topple,
Yep.
Komodo, Horizon, all Hathor's new member. So I'm trying to support all of these chains.
Yep.
I want everyone to benefit. I do agree that the market will help determine which ones gain adoption. But I try to frame it not in the market determining the winner. I frame it in what do you choose to opt out of?
Right.
We've not really had monetary systems and new governance systems where you could opt into from the current one that you're born into, or where you're geographically located. We're now building those systems where you have the option to opt out in case that one or few that you are participating in does not align with your values. And I think that's the more important framing of how winners get chosen or how adoption occurs. It's just, is the ecosystem for which you engage in aligning with your values? And if not, we've built optionality for you to move wherever it does.
Yep.
Hugely important. And permissionlessly opt into a new one. So all of the chains that I interact with, I'm sorry if I forgot some, I hold many bags across many ecosystems, many NFTs. I work with many chains.
Yep.
I hope to own Quai one day, very soon. And so my work is about understanding is a few things. If you give me a minute.
Yeah, of course.
I'm writing a thesis right now called Engineering with Irreducibility. It's just trying to look at proof of work and how you can design economic systems with a computationally irreducible piece of computation. I'm looking at the set of transformation rules on economic symbolic expressions. So a very Wolfram thing, but in economic space. I'm looking at the combination of proof of stake with proof of work chains to say, well, maybe these things are not isolated. Maybe Bitcoin plus some other proof of stake system can be thought of as a thermoeconomic system. And it just kind of depends on how well they do the interoperability. It's a hard challenge. I acknowledge that identity and zero knowledge proofs are massive. We need them in the space. They're here, but they're difficult to implement. And I also acknowledge that if you experience a win on any particular ecosystem, that it kind of sinks your feet into a kind of a tribal dynamic. And the wider you can go, the less you'll mentally force yourself to be tribal. And that's ultimately, I think, there's nothing bad with being tribal, but do it well. I guess would be my advice. Tastefully.
Yeah.
And so I'm just hugely there's so much to say, but I'm hugely excited about revisiting the work that I ultimately entered Wolfram in, which was to study the interaction of computation, energy, and value. And I think Quai is doing something so beautiful in this way that I'm very excited, and I want to help in any way possible.
And so there's more to come on that soon on the horizon, right? So active research on these ideas of thermoeconomics, and then of course all the work that we're doing in discussions with Stephen Wolfram himself, yourself, and others on the Wolfram team. So definitely bringing in the right people here on all the different topics to coordinate. Definitely a lot more we could be doing with others too. I know we've done a lot with Andrew Cote and other people in EAC. So I think it's an exciting time to be in this sort of overlap, this Venn diagram of all these different segments. And so glad to have smart people like yourself charging along with us here.
And keep an eye out for Stephen Wolfram and Quai Part 2
Yeah.
podcast.
Part 2. It felt like the first part was already like 10 parts, but we're going to get a part 2 on top of that.
That was my World Series
Yep.
conversation. It's I think it's got so much in it, and so hopefully we can do it again and reap the benefits.
Absolutely. Well, Steph, thank you for joining us today here in Austin. It's been a pleasure having you. It's been a great conversation. What's the best way for people to find you and follow along?
At Steph_Curdy on Twitter. I would love a follow. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, man.